This week's Parsha in Parshas Behaaloscha, we learn the Parsha of man, which actually appears twice in Torah's Moshe, in Chumash Shemos, in Parshas Challah, and once again in Parshas Behaaloscha, at great length. And as we know, some of the halachas, Hilchas Shabbos, Suda Shabbos, are Zeichel Aman. Lechem Mishna. The reason we need and we eat Lechem Mishna is Zeichel Aman. Man did not descend from the heavens on Shabbos, and therefore Erev Shabbos there was Lechem Mishna. And Lezecha Haman, we eat Lechem Mishna on Shabbos. Another minig which originates with a man is Poires Mape Mekadesh. B'Shas Kiddush we need to cover the Chalas. One of the reasons is Zeichel Aman, Uberedes Atal, Yered Haman Olav, and Chazal teach us that there was a blanket of tal under the man that fell before the man, and the man was covered with tal, and that is the reason we cover the Chalas by Sudas Shabbos. Regarding the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna, there's a machlokes the Magen Avraham and the Taz, whether it's a mitzvah d'oraisa or a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. It is interesting and noteworthy that nor the Magen Avraham nor the Taz don't appear in Hilchas Shabbos, but actually in Hilchas Chanukah and elsewhere. The Taz, Siman Tov Reish Ayin Ches, when we're dealing with the halacha Ner Chanukah and Kiddush Hayam, which has precedence, which comes before the other, Ner Chanukah or Kiddush. The Taz says the question is only if a person has chalas, but he wants to be mekadosh al yayin, which of the two have precedence. But if he doesn't have chalas, well, Pas and Shabbos definitely becomes before Ner Chanukah because that is a mitzvah d'oraisa, which is Lechem Mishna. That is the Taz in Hilchas Chanukah Tufrei Shayin Ches. The Magen Avraham in Tufrei Yud Ches, which is Hilchas Yom Kippur, makes it very clear that Lechem Mishna is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and it is only an asmachta and a zeichel aman, but not a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Chsam Sofer Tshuvas Archaim Siman Vav brings in the name of Minchas Yankov, one of the great Achronim, somewhat of a compromise, and he says, Minatayra, you need 1.5 kikros. The Lashon of the Gemara Shabbos Kuf Yud Zayin Amid Beis, Chayev Odom Levtzoya B'Shabbos Al Shnei Kikros, Keneged Lechem Mishna. The Chsam Sofer quotes the Minchas Yankov, if you have one shleim and another half, Minatayra, that is sufficient. Why? Why would 1.5 be sufficient? An interesting argument. Interesting Mishasheya. Because the Gemara in the beginning of Masechet Brachos, as probably all of you remember, the Gemara deals with the question, how many mishmeros are there in a night? How is the night divided? How many mishmeros? And the Gemara says, Kiven de Ovar, mishmer of a palge, shtei mishmeros korela. If you passed 1.5 mishmeros, it is defined as if 2. So the Minchas Yankov argues, if we need Lechem Mishna, Minatayra 1.5 would be. The reasoning and the rationale is, Lechem Mishna the Baiman. So Baiman it wasn't 1.5. Baiman it was 2. It was a double portion. It was Lechem Mishna Mamish. And if the reason we need Lechem Mishna is Dum Yidaman, whether it's Minatayra or the Rabbanan. Dum Yidaman means Dum Yidaman. And Baiman there were Lechem Mishna. So the Minchas Yankov quoted by the Chsam Sofer is an interesting opinion. But basically, as I quoted, the Machlokes Magen Avraham and Taz, whether Lechem Mishna is a mitzvah d'oraisa or a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, nevertheless, it definitely is one of the basic and important halachas in Sudas Shabbos. And one of the big questions is, how do we define the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna? Interesting, Rashi, in the source of the Sugya, in Shabbos Kuf Yud Zayin, Chayav Odom Levtzoya, Al Shtei Kikros, because by the man we learn Lechem Mishna. Rashi writes, Chayav Odom Levtzoya, Berchas HaMoitzi, Berchas HaMoitzi. So many understand Rashi that actually the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna is to say Berchas HaMoitzi on Lechem Mishna. That is the way we define the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna. According to Rashi, why is the Lashon of Chazal, the Lashon of the Gemara, Chayav Udam Livtzoya al Shtei Kikros? we all know what B'tzias HaPas means. B'tzias HaPas means B'tzias HaPas, cutting the pas. The B'tzia of the pas. But Rashi nevertheless says, Chayav Odom Levtzoya Berchas HaMoitzi. Which brings us to a very interesting question. Many Hasidim, the meaning by many Hasidim is, generally Hasidim are always makpid to make their own Berchas HaNehenin. Hasidim aren't Yotzei Berchas HaNehenin with others. And that is regarding B'tzias HaPas and also regarding Kiddush. So usually the meaning of Hasidim is either each and every member of the family makes Kiddush on his own, even if he doesn't make Kiddush on his own, and is Yotzei with the Kiddush of the Rosh HaMishpocha, but when he drinks wine, when he partakes of the wine, everybody says Berchas HaYayin. And that is an interesting question, which the Briskerov asked his father, Reb Chaim, and as the story goes in Brisk, the Briskerov saw in Shul that the Rav makes Kiddush sometimes, even though in the Litter they didn't have this minig of Keddashim as they had by the Hasidim, but it did happen that either the father, Reb Chaim in his home, made Kiddush, and some of the participants, some of the family members or the guests, made their own Berchas HaYayin. So if it's Leil Shabbos Kodesh, that shouldn't be a problem, because the Ikar Kiddush Leil Shabbos Kodesh is the Broch of Mekadesh HaShabbos. And with that Brocha, the Rosh HaMishpocha is Moitzi all the others. But Kiddush Rabbah, Kiddush Shabbos in the morning, what is Kiddush Shabbos in the morning besides Berchas HaNehenin? Kiddush Rabbah is only the Brocha of Boire Priya Geffen. So of the other members of the community or family or guests want to be Yotzei Kiddush with a father because they don't have a kais, each and every one of them. And when they drink the wine, they once again make Berchas HaGofen. So they weren't Yotzei with his Berchas HaGofen. So where's their Kiddush? How would they Yotzei Kiddush? When they drink, they don't have a kais. It's not a kais molei. And they weren't Yotzei with his Berchas HaGefen, because if you're Yotzei with his Brocha, how could you say a Brocha once again? That would be a Brocha Levatolo. And the same question arises regarding B'tzias HaPas and Lechem Mishna. If the father is the one that has Lechem Mishna, and he breaks the bread, and he gives a piece of challah to the children and other members sitting around the table, and they make a Berchas HaMoitzi, then they weren't Yotzei with his Berchas HaMoitzi. And when they make a Berchas HaMoitzi, they don't have Lechem Mishna. So how would we explain Minig Chasidim according to the simplicity of Rashi, when Rashi says, Chayav Odom Levtzoya Berchas HaMoitzi? If it's Berchas HaMoitzi, how is he Moitzi the others if they say the Brocha once again? So Rashi does say, Chayav Odom Levtzoya Berchas HaMoitzi. Shulchan Aruch Harav Simarei Shayin Dalet Siv Dalet Chayodom Klal Zayin Siv Beis in Hilchas Shabbos Kaf HaChaim and many others say, according to Rashi, if you're Yotzei, you don't have Lechem Mishna before you, and you're Yotzei with the Lechem Mishna of the Aviyah Mishpocha, of the Rosh HaMishpocha, of the senior member of the family, you're Yotzei with him, then you cannot say Berchas HaMoitzi, because if you say Berchas HaMoitzi, you weren't Yotzei Lechem Mishna. So the Eshel Avram, B'Chacharov, in Simarei Shayin Dalet, coming to be Miyashav Minig Chasidim to explain their Minig, he says, no, Lechem Mishna is B'tzias HaPas. That is the Lashon of the Gemara, Chayav Odom Levtzoya. And if the mitzvah is B'tzia, then Shlichu Shel Odom Kemoisoi. And the person that does B'tzias HaPas is a Shliach of all the others. Which is a questionable argument. First of all, it goes against Rashi. Rashi says, Chayav Odom Levtzoya Berchas HaMoitzi. He does have an argument, so why is the Lashon of the Gemara Chayav Odom Levtzoya al Shtei Kikris, and why doesn't Rashi say Chayav Odom Levorech al Shtei Kikris? Arguing that this is a concept of Shlichus is also a bit strange. If it is Shlichus, then you need Minui. The members aren't aware that he is their Shliach. They didn't delegate authority. They didn't ask him to do B'tzias HaPas for them. So this wouldn't be Shlichus. So Rav Waldman says, Zochen liyodem shaloi b'fonov. Interesting. Do we find the concept of Zochen liyodem shaloi b'fonov b'mitzvahs? Shaloi b'fonav means without him asking you should do so. Doesn't make a difference whether it is in his presence or not. So by Zachan Yodem Shaloi b'fonav, we do not need the consent and the intention of the Shaleach, but at least we need the consent and the intention of the Shaleach. And it never occurred to us that when a person is Britzeya, he needs to be Machaven to be Zoicha for all the others. For many reasons, Zachan Yodem Shaloi b'fonav is not relevant here in our case, and I think neither is Shlichus. So this interpretation is a far-fetched interpretation, which brings us back to the basic question. So how are Chasidim Yoitze Lechem Mishna? In my opinion, we need to reconcile the Lashon of the Gemara Chayav Udam Livtzoya al Shtei Kikrois and Lashon Rashi Berchas HaMoitzi. And therefore, I think that the basic gather of Lechem Mishna is a person has to be Koiveya, Su'uda, and Lechem Mishna. And that is the Lashon Chayav Odam Livtzoya Shtei Kikrois. And when Rashi says Berchas HaMoitzi, he doesn't actually mean the Brocha. He cannot mean the Brocha. Because according to the Taz, if Lechem Mishna is the Uraisa, Berchas HaNe'enin is only the Rabbanon. So how could we define Lechem Mishna as Berchas HaMoitzi if Lechem Mishna is the Uraisa? And Berchas HaMoitzi is only Midarabanan. So how could we define the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna as Berchas HaMoitzi? And therefore my understanding in Rashi would be, we could mistakenly explain and understand Chayav Odam Levtzoy al Shtei Kikrois. It could be at the end of the Suda. You know, after you're through with the Suda, at the end of the Suda, you could bring Shtei Kikrois, Bibitzei, and the Kikrois, and Nira Kazayas, or even less. Would a person be Yoitzi, the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna? No. Because my understanding is the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna is to be Koiveya Su'uda al Lechem Mishna. And that is what Rashi means, Berchas HaMoitzi, meaning you need to start your Suda, and Berchas HaMoitzi has to be on Lechem Mishna. Because the basic idea of Chayav Odam Levtzoya is not the brocha in itself. At least according to the Taz, it cannot be the brocha into itself, because the brocha is the Rabbanon, and Lechem Mishna is Min HaTorah. Rashi means to say that the shtei kickers are the shtei kickers on which you make Berchas HaMoitzi Tchilas HaSuda, because the gather of Lechem Mishna is Tzorach Lekvoya Suda Lechem Mishna, and that reconciles the Lashon of Rashi with the Lashon of the Gemara Chayav Odam Livtzoya. Livtzoya meaning Tchilas HaSuda. When you make Berchas HaMoitzi and you begin your Suda, you need to be Mitzoya Shtei Kikrois. That is the gather of Mitzvahs Lechem Mishna, and therefore, in my understanding, each of the members, if the father, he is the Rosh HaMishpocha, he was B'tzei and Shtei Kikrois, if you partake from his Challah, you are Koveya Suda and Lechem Mishna. Because those Shtei Kikrois don't cease to be Lechem Mishna after the B'tzia. Those are the Lechem Mishna upon which are all our Koveya Suda. So if everything depends on the bracha, that is a problem. Because when each of the family members says the bracha, it is no longer Lechem Mishna, but it is not actually your personal bracha, it is Kviyas Suda. And all our Kviyas Suda on those Lechem Mishna upon which the father made his bracha. So it doesn't matter the fact that you're making your bracha as well. The point isn't the bracha, the point is Tchilas HaSuda and Kviyas Suda should be on Lechem Mishna. That is my understanding. And therefore, those that actually make the bracha on Lechem Mishna, Vadai, that is the proper minig, but Chasidim that each and every member of the family makes his own Berchas HaMoitzi are still Mekayim the mitzvah of Chayav Levtzoy al Shtei Kikrois, because their Kviyas Suda is on Lechem Mishna. So the basic... Yeah, that goes back many years, and it is interesting because basically Hasidim are Ashkenazim. Today it's not exclusive. Nothing is exclusive today. But and Ashkenazim are Noye Kishitas Ramo, and the Ramo makes it very clear that the Balabai is Boitzeya, and he is Moitzi all the others. The same rule applying to Kiddush. But Hasidim were always makbid, and this goes back many years. Berchas Ananan, everyone says his own Berchas Ananan. Now we're not Yotze Berchas Ananan with one another. Maybe in another opportunity we will elaborate more on this question. So the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna is one of the halachas which are based on man. Bnei Yisrael b'midbar, Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, they had Lechem Mishna, and therefore Chazal Zeichel and Man were metaken the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna, and as above mentioned, according to the Taz and Hilchas Chanukah, Lechem Mishna is the Diuraisa, according to the Mogen Avraham Hilchas Yom Kippurim, Lechem Mishna is the Rabbanan, and the Posek is an Asmachta. Just coming to prove what Chazal say, Divrei Torah, Aniyim b'mokom echad, v'ashirim b'mokom achar. We would expect to find this machlokes in Hilchos Shabbos, and it is not in Hilchos Shabbos, but far away destinations. The Mogen Avraham in Hilchos Yom Kippurim, and the Taz in Hilchos Chanukah. The other minig I mentioned before is covering the chalas when one makes kiddush. And this minig has a source in the Gemara. In Psochim, Daf Kuf, and elsewhere, Poiris, Mappe, Umekadosh. If a person is in the middle of the Suda, and Shabbos comes in, Yom Tov comes in, Poiris, Mappe, Umekadosh, what is the need of Poiris, Mappe? And some Ritonim interpret that whenever you make Kiddush, you need to be Poiris, Mappe. And the Rashbam actually in Masechet Psochim says that the minig was b'yamei kedem, that they brought in the tables only after Kiddush. Once upon a time, in the days of Chazal, Seder Suda was drastically different than it is in our communities. Basically, people sat al gabe mitois, yeshiva mizrachit, on the floor, on rugs, on machzelois, and each and every one had a little table for himself, and it was personal. And therefore, the minig b'yamei kedem, according to the Rashbam, is that they brought in the shulchanois only after Kiddush. But because in our times, and this goes back many years to the days of the Rishonim, we sit around the table, and the table is big and heavy. It is impossible to bring in the table after Kiddush. And we cannot make Kiddush in one place and then move on to another room because Kiddush has to be b'mokom suda. And therefore the minig is Poiris Mappe u'mikadosh. So the table is set because the Gemara also says in Shabbos when a person comes home, and Shulchanoi Oroch v'metosoi mutzas, the Malachim say Ashrei shekochaloi, and then they say Yehi rotzon sheyeh b'Shabbos haba. So on one hand, we set the table when people come home from shul. On the other hand, it is customary that we bring in the shulchan only after Kiddush, and that is the minig of Poiris Mappe u'mekadosh. But why? Why do we cover the chalas when we make Kiddush? 5 different explanations we find in the Rishonim, and there are many nafkaminas lahalacha between one approach and the other. She'iltas de Rav Achai Goen, one of the more important sources, because in the beginning of Ksubis, and once again in Zvochem, there's a machlokes Tosis and Rashbam. Not many people are aware of this machlokes, who actually was the Baal HaShiltos, She'iltas de Rav Achai Goen. The Rashbam maintains that the She'iltas was Rav Achai, that is mentioned a few different places in Shas. So according to the Rashbam, the She'iltas bears extreme importance because that is actually one of the parts of Divrei Chazal, of the basic Torah Shebal Peh. Tosfos rejects the opinion of the Rashbam, and according to Tosfos, the She'iltas was one of the Gainim. Important enough, but nevertheless, not one of the Ameroim. So She'iltas de Rav Achai in Parshas Yisro, She'ilta Nun Daled, the She'iltas explains that Mishum Kvoid Shabbos, we want to bring the Chalas in Shabbos Kodesh and not before Shabbos. That belongs to Yakre de Shabbat, to Kvoid Shabbos, to emphasize, and it should be evident and obvious that this is Suda Shabbos, prepared for Shabbos, and therefore we do not put the Chalas on the table before Shabbos. So either we bring the chalas in after Kiddush, or we cover the chalas and uncover them after Kiddush, Mishum Kvod Shabbos. That is the she'iltas that Rev Achai going. The other approach is brought in Tosfos, Psochim Kuf Vav. And Tosfos says, Zeicher Leman. One of the dinim that is Zeicher Leman. And the man was covered with tal, Zeicher Leman, we cover the chalas. Approach number 3 is brought in the Mordechai, in Mesechet Psochim, and also in Orchos Chaim. According to the basic halachas of brochas, Shivas Aminim come before any other grain or fruit. And within the Shivas Aminim, Kol HaKoidem B'Posek Koidem LeBrocha. So Chito comes before Gefen. So by basic halachic definition, if we have bread or yayin, we should make the brocha on the bread before the yayin. However, the mitzvah of Kiddush, yayin has precedence. If we have no yayin, then mekadosh ala pas. But if we have wine, so in Hilchas Kiddush Hayom, yayin comes before chita. But in Dina Brochas, chita would come before yayin. So how do we reconcile this contradiction between Dina Kiddush and Dina Brochas? So we cover the pas, ignoring the pas, as if it isn't lifonenu, and therefore one can make the brocha on the yayin. And in Hilchas Kiddush, yayin is more important, and yayin has precedence over pas. That is explanation number 3 brought in the Orchos Chaim and also in the Mordechai in Mesechet Sukkah. Number 4, an additional reasoning that we find in the Mordechai, and very well known, Mishum Bezoyin the Pas. If we choose wine and neglect the Pas, Mishum Bezoyin the Pas, and Pas is choshever than any other Michael. It is Koveya Brocha Liyatzmoi, and it is the Iker Seuda, Mishum Bezoyin the Pas. We do not want to insult the pas, and therefore we cover it when we make Kiddush. Well, it is natural that this is symbolic, and many minhagim and halachas and even mitzvahs are symbolisms, because once somebody asks, well, if the pas could see, he could probably hear as well, and he's going to be hearing that we make a boida priya gofen. So the pas doesn't see and the pas doesn't hear. It is for us and not for the pas. And many mitzvahs, even mitzvahs diuraises, some of the Rishonim and some of the great commentators throughout the ages had the approach of symbolisms, and this minig is definitely symbolic. Umishim bezyoyne de pas, we cover the bread when we make Kiddush Hayom. The last approach is also an approach that has sources in Divrei Rishonim, in Lechet Yosha and others. In Brochas Mem Beis, the Gemara says, mitzvah lekvoya suda alayayin. It is a mitzvah to be korveya suda al hayayin. A mitzvah to be korveya suda al pas, but also al hayayin. And to emphasize that our intention is to be korveya suda al hayayin, the pas will have its turn. After Kiddush, we uncover the pas, we make berachas hamoitzi, we're betzei al pas, alecha Mishna. But we also want to be Koveya Suda al Yayin, and therefore we cover the pas when we make Kiddush to emphasize that we are Koveya Suda al Yayin. So these are 5 different approaches. What is the origin and the reasoning of the minig to be Mechases a pas when we make Kiddush? And we will discuss 10 different nafkaminas lahalacha between one approach and the other. And this will determine many minhagim. Minhagi yasur regarding the basic minig of Peiris, Mappa, Umekadosh. So in some kehilas, the minig of covering the pas was only Belel Shabbos. Kiddush Rabbi Shabbos in the morning, they did not cover the pas. What would be the argument in explaining and giving basis and logic to this minig? I think it is based on the She'iltas, probably the earliest source of this minig. According to the She'iltas, we do not want to put the pas on the table Erev Shabbos. It is Kvod Shabbos that liachar knisas hayoim, liachar kiddush hayoim, liachar kiddush alayayin, we bring the pas in. And that is more obvious that it's Lekavod Shabbos. It wasn't here before. According to this approach, it is only Leil Shabbos. Shabbos morning is Shabbos, before Kiddush as after Kiddush. So according to the approach of the She'iltas, this minhag would apply only Beleil Shabbos. However, our minhag is, obviously according to Rashi, maybe Zeichel Aman, maybe Mishim Bezoyin the Pas, and therefore the more prevalent and the more accepted minhag is Kiddush Rabbah, the same as Kiddush Leil Shabbos Kodesh. And Shabbos morning we also cover the Pas when we make Kiddush. However, I think in most shuls and most kehillas, by Shalashudis, we don't cover the Pas. Why not? Because if it has to do with Kiddush, Shalashudis, we don't make Kiddush. But if it has to do with Zeichel Aman, Lecha Mishna, we should do the same, Shalashudis. We have Lecha Mishna and Shalashudis. Lecha Mishna is a Zeichel Aman. Poiris Mappa is Zeichel Aman. So why would Shalashudis be different than Shabbos morning or Leil Shabbos Kodesh? So according to the She'iltas, this minhag is relevant only Leil Shabbos, neither Shabbos morning nor Shalashudis. If it has to do with Kiddush, Mishim Bezoyin the Pas, that we are a Mekadesh Alayayin, then the rule applies to Shabbos morning as well, but not to Shalashudis. If you make Kiddush on wine. Yes. Do you mean to provoke me? Yes. I said before that Hasidim make their own birchas on a henin. I can't say that Hasidim make Kiddush on Schnapps, but Galiciana Hasidim do. And that was the minhag in Galicia, in Ropshitz, in Tzanz, and in some others. So, I grew up in a Tzanzer family. I have difficulty of defining who I am today, but I did grow up in a family of Tzanzer Hasidim, and I am proud to be a disciple of the great Kloiser Megarebi, and he made Kiddush on Schnapps, Shabbos morning, because that was minhag of Yosef, that was the minhag of the Divrei Chaim. He was Mekabel of the Rav Shetzerov. But I myself, I do not think we have a concept of Chamar Medina in our days. I don't think Schnapps today could be defined as Chamar Medina. So the Kloiser Megarebi made Kiddush on banana liquor, of all the drinks in the world. So why did he use banana liquor? Because the Belzerov, Rabbanan, used banana liquor. And when the Kloiser Megarebi visited the Belzerov said, Agita Mashke. He definitely was an angel, but one could challenge his taste when it comes to liquor. So to define banana liquor as Chamar Medina would be very, very far-fetched. Probably besides Belz Chassidim and Kloiser Chassidim, nobody drinks banana liquor any longer. I wonder why they manufacture it. But today, we are living in a modern day and age, and there is such a tremendous variety. I don't think any mashke could be defined as Chamar Medina in our day and age. Everything today is catered to one's personal taste. So once upon a time, there were entire areas, towns and cities and countries where most of the people drank the same mashke. That is no longer. I think the only thing that everybody drinks, or many people drink, is Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola it's an artificial mashke. I don't think it could be defined as Chamar Medina. What I really feel is today what people drink more than anything else is water. And water, you definitely can't make Kiddush on water. And therefore I feel that the only thing you could really make Kiddush on is wine or grape juice. Because in my opinion, grape juice is kiyayin lechol dover. Besides Purim, grape juice is wine for Dalat Koises, for Kiddush, for anything else. But besides yayin, nothing would be defined today as Chamar Medina, and therefore I am very doubtful if one could really make Kiddush on Schnapps today. So, coming back to the nafkaminas between one approach and the other. Shalashudis, some achronim say you should cover the pas by shalashudis as well because it's zeichel aman. And just as we have lecha Mishna by shalashudis, we should cover the pas because if we have lecha Mishna zeichel aman, we should have poiris mappa zeichel aman. But the more common minig is that by shalashudis we don't cover the pas. Obviously, our minig is based on kiddush, mishum bezyoinoi shel pas, and therefore by shalashudis we don't do it. The Yoruch Reish Tzadik Aleph Sif Yud maintains, he writes already that by shalashudis the minig is not to cover the pas, obviously based on the approach that the reason to cover the pas is not zeichel aman but mishum bezyoinoi shel pas. Another nefkamina would be, do we need a mappa beneath the pas or only on top? If it is mishum dinei broches, yakra di shabbata, bizyoinoi shel pas, according to all these reasonings, you only need to cover it from above. But if it's zeichel aman, you need metachas and me'al. Uberedes atal, yered haman olav, so the man was enveloped in tal from beneath, from above, and therefore we need a mappa beneath and not only on top. And if the pas is brought in la'achar kiddush, do we still need to cover the pas? If it is mishum bezyoinoi shel pas, it is only when you say berachas hagefen. But if it is zeichel aman, then even liachar berachas hagefen, which brings us to various different minhagim. When do we uncover the pas? So everybody agrees that by kiddush the pas should be covered. Till when? So in some sources we find after kiddush. When you approach berachas hamaitzi, you uncover the pas. There is somewhat of a controversy regarding the Mishnah Brura, Reish Ayin Daled, Sif Koten Daled. So the Aruch HaShulchan, Reish Ayin Aleph, Sif Chov Bei says, Achrei berachas hamaitzi. When you say hamaitzi, the pas still should be covered. That is obvious in the Emden Siddur by Rabbi Yankiv Emden. This minig necessarily being based on zeichel aman. Maybe also kedima of brachas. But you already said the berachas hagefen, so what's the point in keeping the pas covered when you say berachas hamoitzi? So if we maintain it is zeichel aman, there is room for an argument that when you say berachas hamoitzi, still should be covered. As long as it's lecha Mishna, it should be like lecha Mishna of man. However, that is not a necessity, because the man was covered with tal only as long as it was out in the field. But when it was brought into the house, it was no longer covered with tal. So this is only a zeichel aman. And one could argue, maybe it's enough of a zeichel if it's by kiddush covered. Many argue that it's a halachic mistake or violation if the pas is covered by berachas hamaitzi, because berachas hanahanan, like berachas hamitzvahs, are to be said oiver l'siyosan v'lo oiver de oiver. As little hefsek as possible should be between berachas hamaitzi and betzias hapas. And that is the reason that we cut into the hamaitzi and the lecha Mishna even before saying the bracha. So why cover it? Necessitating uncovering the pas between the bracha and achila, and therefore the more common minig, which is also my minig, when I say berachas hamaitzi, the pas is not covered. So there are various different minhagim, and these minhagim are also dependent on the various different explanations. What is the origin and the rationale of the minig of covering the pas? Ulai, ken. If you cover the pas with a transparent cover, or with a reshet, in which you could see through the mappa. But because I said before that covering the pas is symbolic, I'm not thoroughly convinced that it makes a difference whether it is see-through or not see-through. After all, you covered the pas. And even if you can't see through, you know it's there. So it's more of a symbolic act covering the pas. So I don't know whether there really would be a halachic difference whether you could see through or not see through. But what is the din if a person is mekadesh ala pas? He has no yayin, or he cannot drink wine for health reasons, and he is mekadesh ala pas. Does he have to cover the pas? This is a discussion between great poskim, the Levush and the Elio Rabbah. Once again, dependent on the different reasons. If it's boishtoi shall pass, or if it is because we have a problem, which of the two brochas comes earlier, has precedence, then if you're mekadesh alakas and he's not even making berachas hayayin, there's no reason to cover the pas. But if it is zeichel aman, then he should cover it, even though he is mekadesh alapas. So once again, there would be a difference between the two tamim. And how about Kiddush Shabbos in the morning, when you have no pas, and there's a Kiddush in shul, and there's cake or cookies or kugel? Do you have to cover those? Once again, if it is zeichel aman, you're not doing lecha Mishna. This is not the Ikasida Shabbos. Lecha Mishna is a concept. Lecha Mishna shall pass and berachas amoitzi. So by Kiddush you don't have a lecha Mishna. It has nothing to do with zeichel aman. But if the reason is mishum boishtoi shall pass, well, maybe only by pas there is a kpeid of the covered of pas. But if the reason is maybe berachas amoitzi and chito has precedence over berachas hagefen, that even by a kiddush, if you're eating kugel or cake that is made out of chito, you have the problem and therefore you should cover. And this is also a minig that different minhagim in different places, also dependent on the different approaches and different reasonings. The Leket Yoshu was one of the Rishonim, a Talmud of the Trumas Hadeshen, and he quotes that the minig of the Trumas Hadeshen was many Talmidim of the yeshiva. I think it's the Maril, not the Trumas Hadeshen. The Maril was a great Rosh Yeshiva, and they all were samach al shulchanoi, and the table was full of food, and only the Maril, he was the Mekadesh, he covered his Lecha Mishnah, but all the others were open, and they were not covered. And his approach is that, as I said, it is a symbolic act, and therefore it would be enough if his pas is covered, and that obviously is more acceptable if it's zeichel aman. So many different minhagim, and one of the interesting minhagim that we find in the Magen Avraham and Siman Kuf Pei, the Magen Avraham brings a minhag that by berachas hamazon once again the pas was covered. Why? Because once again we have the kais, which is an interesting minhag, and many achronim question this minhag because zeichel aman, by berachas hamazon we no longer have lecha Mishnah. Is the problem boishtoi shall pass? We cannot and we do not make berachas hamoitzi once again. We already made a moitzi at the beginning of the Suda. Is it that we're not mevorach ala pas? Kosher brocha is only yayin. So it is very difficult to understand and define this minig in accordance to all the different approaches we quoted. So one of the early achronim, Shalas Teshuvas Be'er Asik Simen Chov Zayin has an original approach. But the source of this minig is Rabbeinu Bachye, one of the Rishonim, and therefore it really merits an effort to give somewhat of a hezbollah. One of the Svarim, the less known Svarim of Rabbeinu Bachye is Shulchan Shel Arba, and it is there that he writes the minig once again to cover the pas b'shas berchas hamozoin kos shel brocha. So the Be'er Asik says, well, berchas hamozoin brings down shefa. Ve'ena brocha metzuya ela bedover hasomu minuayin. So in a symbolic way, we cover the pas. It should be somu minuayin that berchas Hashem ita ashir, and the shefa brought down alidei berchas hamozon should be challah pas, and that is why, that is the interpretation of the Be'er Asik in covering the pas by berchas hamozon as well. כן, בליל הסדר אנחנו מגלים את המצות ומכסים את המצות, but that is a totally different origin than anything we discussed today. That has to do with Leil HaSeder. And in some parts of the Leil HaSeder, when we want to stress the matzah zu she'onu oichlem, sipi yetzias mitzrayim, we uncover the matzahs, and in other parts we stress only the dalat koises and not the matzahs, but that is a different idea and a different concept. Well, if he is korveya suda, and then he needs to make a berchas hamoitzi and berchas hamozain, then he definitely would have to cover the pas. However, I know very few people that Shabbos would be korveya suda and pasabol bekisnen. Why would one do so? And I am generally a makel in the din of Kviya Suda b'Pasabol b'Kisne, as I wrote at great length in Minchas Osher Chelik Beis Shalas Teshuvas. I do not agree to the machmirim that say on Dalet Beitzim you make berchas hamoitzi. I think one cannot make berchas hamoitzi on Pasabol b'Kisne only if he really eats a lot of Pasabol b'Kisne. But because this is not the basic sugya we're dealing with today, we'll leave it for another opportunity. So at the end of today's shir, I quoted the Be'er Asik. The reason we cover the pas by Berchas Hamozon is we should benefit and binana from Berchas Shomayim. So we are a generation that loves Gulas. We are a generation that seeks Gulas. But umay dismay. The stranger, the more esoteric as Gula is, for some reason it has more appeal to us all. And many people have really strange gulas. And without sounding cynical, I do wish to say that the most important gulas are the ones that we find in Chazal and in the Rishonim, and the ones that basically make sense. So on a daily basis I am asked, what is this gula for Panosa? And we are living in a different financial time, especially for B'nai Torah and Eretz Yisrael. So I think the most important zgula for Panosa, probably everybody would guess, Parshas Aman. Yes, Parshas Aman. Parshas Aman is brought in Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. But the Mishnah Brura and the Magen Avraham and all the poskim explain that the zgula of Parshas Aman is not merely saying Parshas Aman, but it is really getting into it, and the bitochen and emunah. When we say Parshas Aman, we should try to understand and appreciate and to feel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Yoshev Mezan u'Mefanes mebeitze kinem ad karne reyemim miyodoi hagdoilo harachavo v'hamaleo. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu sustained our forefathers in the Midbar, giving them lechem and hashomayim. So everything is biyodoi. So it is not merely saying Parshas Aman, but appreciating and understanding Parshas Aman. And the Sefer HaChinuch writes, and the Mishnah Berurah quotes him in Dinei Birchas HaMazon, that Birchas HaMazon bekavana is a sgula for Parnasa. That is a sgula for Shefa. And it is the same idea as Parshas Aman. The only bracha that lekuli alm is minatoir is Birchas HaMazon. So obviously, of all the mea brachas that we say every day, Birchas HaMazon is unique. And the essence of Birchas HaMazon is expressing thanks and gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for providing for us, for the sustenance and the panosa, that He is mashpia min hashamayim. And therefore, Birchas HaMazon is the greatest gula for shefa and for hatzlacha. And in the same way, Parshas Aman, betochen is a sgula for panosa. The Pasuk says in Tehillim, Haboiteach b'Hashem chesed yisoy v'venu. Ukemidas habetochen kach midas hashefa. So Hasidim tell the story of the great tzaddik Reb Zusha Mahanepali, Reb Melech Melezhensk's older brother. And Reb Zusha was once sitting with his Chavraya Kadisha, ala Torah v'ala Avodah, and days passed and they had nothing to eat. And there was a neighbor down the block who was a rich almana, and from time to time she supplied the Hasidim sitting in the shtibel with all their needs, but they haven't seen her for a week. And the Hasidim plead with their Rebbe, please, why don't you go over and tell her that we're hungry, we have nothing to eat for the past few days. And Reb Zusha felt that that is beyond the hishtadlus, which is demanded from him. But being Reb Zusha Mahanepali and having Rachmanis and the young Hasidim, Oivdei Hashem, so obviously he put on his tillip, his lezavulka, walked down the block up to the house of that rich almana, touched the doorknob, and went back to the shtibel. And as Hasidim asked, you didn't do anything. You didn't even knock on the door. How do you expect her to know that you were standing outside and you touched the doorknob? And Reb Zusha said, for me, I do not feel that I need to do more shtadlus. Anything I will do beyond that is more than is required. And in a few minutes, that lady showed up and she saw there's nothing to eat in the Beis Medrash, and she sold a truckload of supplies. And Reb Zusha said, the shtadlus demanded and expected from every individual is dependent on the midas habetochen that he has. Speaking about Reb Zusha Mahanepali, there is only once in the entire Noam el-Melech in which Reb Melech Melezhensk quotes his brother Reb Zusha, and that is in Parshas Behar. In Parshas Behar, when we learn the mitzvah of Shmitas Karkois and Shnas HaShviyas, and we are in the midst of Shnas HaShviyas, so in Parshas Behar, we find the Pasuk says, V'chisoy memanoichel miyato, v'tzivisi ez berochosi. Rabbi Melech quotes Reb Zusha Mahanepali, and he says, if you wouldn't ask any questions, there would be no need for any special brachas. Isn't it natural? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you not to plow, and not to sow, and not to harvest, and not to work in the fields, do you think He'll let you starve? If you wouldn't ask, Ma'anoichel miyato, you would have no doubt there would be abundance and there would be no need for any special bracha. But when you will ask, Ma'anoichel miyato, with that doubt, you are porgeya in sinoides hashefa, by which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mashpia shefa elyon, shefa eloki. But nevertheless, because you are observing the mitzvah of Shemitah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises, you will lack nothing. V'tzivisi es brachosi. And a Sefer Torah Savois from the Slonim Rebbe's, it is brought that the Lechavish Tzaddik said that this is a pshat that Reb Zusha heard from Eliyahu Hanavi. Interesting. Why would he need to hear this from Eliyahu Hanavi? I think Reb Zusha was great enough to be mechadis this pshat this pshat on his own. And I would say, Chocham Odef Menovi. Why does he need to hear this from Eliyahu Hanavi? He actually was machaven to one of the great Rishonim, the Seforno, on that same Parsha. But the Seforno goes beyond Reb Zusha Poli. And the Seforno says, if you wouldn't ask Ma Noichel Miyato, the bracha would be a far greater bracha. Like the Gemara says in Yumid Aflamites. Kol Yomav Shel Shimon HaTzadek Nishtalchu bracha belechem haponim ub'shtei alechem. Oichel kimo umizborach b'mayav. There would be no double in the fields. The harvest would be the same. But it would satisfy you for 2 years. And the bracha would be the bracha that was Kol Yomav Shel Shimon HaTzadek. Oichel kimo umizborach b'mayav. However, your question, Ma Noichel Me'ato, was disruptive. And therefore, it is not that bracha, but a lesser bracha. And the fields will give abundant fruit. But the toil will also be double. Not only the harvest will be double. Double charish, double zriya, double katsir, double isuf, double ichsun. And that is because you asked Ma Noichel Miyato. So the Seforno, as Reb Zusha Poli, the basic idea being, Midas HaBetochen brings chesed, v'haboiteach ba'Hashem chesed yisoy vevenu. So if Reb Zusha Poli heard Eliyahu Hanavi, so I'll give you even a greater chiddush. The Talmud was one of the great disciples of the Baal Shem Tov, and one of his forum is called Ksoinis Pasim. And in Ksoinis Pasim, Parsha Shemini, he writes, B'Shem HaRambam, that if our betochen would be on the same level as the betochen of our forefathers, as Dora Midbar, we would eat man bezman hazeh. It is only dependent on betochen. Where is that in the Rambam? I dare to say it's nowhere in the Rambam. Well, I went through the Mishnah Torah many times. I think I went through the Parsha Mishna. I went through the Moreh Nevuchim. I don't think that's anywhere in the Rambam. Maybe he heard it from the Rambam. Who knows? It was only 600 years from the Rambam to the Talmud, but maybe, if Reb Susha heard it from Eliyahu Hanavi, maybe the Talmud heard it from the Rambam, but that is what he quotes from the Rambam. Well, the Rambam is of Shmita v'Yovel comes close, but he doesn't talk about man. Yes. The Rambam writes in the last halacha of Shmita v'Yovel, Lo yishevet Levi belvad ela kol ish v'ish mekol boi olam asher Nadvo ruchoi v'hevino madoi lamod lefnei Hashem liyavdei uleshorosoi ledai v'es Hashem hoylech yosho kafi shosou elokim v'poirek mi'olav hoylech hashboines arabim asher bikshu lehem b'nei Adam, writes the Rambam, harei ze neskadish kodesh kodeshim v'yaspik Hashem kol tzrochov. So the Rambam writes, but the Rambam demands not only midas habetochen, far more than midas habetochen. Lamoid lefnei Hashem la'avdai u'leshorosoi l'deo es Hashem hoylech yosho kafi shosohu elokim v'poirek mi'olav hoylech hashboines harabim asher bikshu lehem b'nei Adam harei ze niskadesh kodesh kodeshim v'yaspek Hashem kol tzrochov. So there is something in midas habetochen. Midas habetochen brings shefa. And that is the underlying idea in the Sefer HaChinuch. Berches HaMozoin B'Kavona. When you stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashlech al Hashem Yehovcho V'hu Yachal Kolecho. And with a munah pshuta you thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu ala oretz ha'toiva, ala oretz v'ala mozoin. That is poiseach sharei shefa. And the same with Parsha Saman. So the minute to say Parsha Saman every day is not about saying Parsha Saman, but feeling Parsha Saman. And the emunah pshuta that everything is miyodoi hamaleo harachava, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no lack of anything. So many times when people ask me questions, to what degree could we cut corners trying to make a living? And I say, Kadosh Baruch Hu has no problem with cash. No. He has enough money. He could print as much money as he wishes. He doesn't have a problem with inflation. I cannot believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects us to act in any dishonest way for Parnasa. Doesn't he have enough money to give us with integrity and with honesty? We need more betochen, and we need to believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us shefa and brocha in atzlacha, b'darkei yosha, b'heter, b'koved, u'b'shefa. So saying Parsha Saman, which we learn in this week's Parsha, and Berchas Hamazon B'Kavana, those are the two most important segulas for Parnas. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us all Daim Achsori Ashiach Saloi. He should bestow His rachamim upon us all, B'bona, B'chaya, B'mezoina, in the schus of Midas HaBetochen and Emunah Pshut. He should fulfill all our needs, Beruchnius uvegashmius, and we should all be Zoicha to Chazdi Shamayim, Yeshuas Yisroel, and be as Goel Tzedek, B'mheru v'yomeinu amen. Letzari v'lesimchosi. Next week Sunday, I will be in London for a family simcha, so we will not have a Shiur next week. The coming Shiur Be'ez Hashem is in 2 weeks' time.